It is with great pleasure that we welcome everyone here tonight to the Ruth Gay Seminar in Jewish Studies. This seminar series is made possible thanks to a major gift to the YIVO Institute in 2008 by the family of Ruth Gay, the well-known Jewish writer and historian who passed away in 2006. The seminar is presented 3 times a year by researchers or writers who have used the resources of the YIVO archives and library. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to Ruth Gay's family. I understand that Shirley Gorenstein, Ruth Gay's sister, and Sarah Glazer, Ruth Gay's daughter, are here with us today. Please join me in expressing our thanks and appreciation and applauding the benefactors of this major program at YIVO, which has contributed so much to our understanding of Jewish life, history, and culture. I would also like to express my appreciation to everyone who worked or supported this event. Jonathan Brent, the Executive Director of YIVO, whose support of this program has contributed to its success. Fruma Moore, the Senior Archivist, who has organized this program since its inception in 2008, who invited Ellen and Ahron to speak tonight, and who prepared these remarks that I'm reading right now. Ludmila Shalakova, the Director of the Archives and Library. Etty Goldwasser, the Ruth Gay Seminar Coordinator. Yoni Lamb, the Technical Director from the Center for Jewish History, and all of the YIVO staff and the Center for Jewish History staff. Tonight's event is held in celebration of the publication of a new book, Oedipus in Brooklyn and Other Stories, written by the Yiddish writer Blume Lempel and translated by authors Ellen Cassedy and Yermiyahu Ahron Taub. The book has just been published by a collaboration between Mandel Villar Press and Dryad Press. The manuscript was the winner of the 2012 Translation Prize awarded by the National Yiddish Book Center. Copies of this book are available for sale, as you may have noticed on your way in. Blume Lempel was born May 13, 1910 in Galicia. She emigrated in 1929 to Paris and in 1939 to New York. She began writing in 1943 with a story published in Der Tag under the pseudonym Rachel Halperin. Her novel, Zwischen zwei Welt, was serialized in the newspaper Morgen Freiheit in 1947. She wrote only in Yiddish and received the Atran Award, the I.J. Siegel Prize for Yiddish Literature for her book, A Rege von Emes, and the Zhidlovsky Prize. As YIVO is the world's largest repository of Yiddish books and newspapers, and also holds the world's largest archival collection of original manuscripts and letters relating to Yiddish literature, it is most fitting that tonight's program is held here. Indeed, Blume Lempel's stories are found in the YIVO library, in the printed issues of the newspaper Der Tag and in the Morgen Freiheit, while her private letters are dispersed among a number of papers of Yiddish writers held here in the YIVO archives. Having a program on Yiddish literature is particularly exciting, and we hope that you'll all enjoy tonight's programs. Now, just a few words on the presenters. Ellen Cassedy is an author and translator. Her book, We Are Here, Memories of the Lithuanian Holocaust, was published in 2012 by the University of Nebraska Press and is the winner of numerous awards, including the Grub Street National Book Prize for Nonfiction, the Towson Prize for Literature, and the Best Book Prize from the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies. In 2012, Ellen Cassedy gave a lecture here at YIVO on the Lithuanian Holocaust, a subject which she has explored for close to a decade. Ahron is a former YIVO staff member and the author of 5 books of poetry, the most recent being The Education of a Daffodil. So please join me in welcoming our presenters.
Shalom Aleichem. So we're so glad to welcome you, all of you here. Thank you to YIVO and the Center for Jewish History, and especially thanks to Fruma Moore and to Alex Weiser for organizing this event this evening.
We remember Ruth Gay with great admiration and affection, and we thank her family for making this evening possible. We want to thank our wonderful publishers, who Alex mentioned, Dryad Press and Mandel Villar Press. A special thank you also to David Roskies and Jeffrey Chandler, and to the many other friends, readers, writers, translators, and Yiddish lovers who helped bring this book into being.
It's a great pleasure to share with you the life and work of Blume Lempel, an extraordinary writer who deserves to be much better known by English language readers. We'll talk tonight about her life and her work, and because we're here at YIVO, will pay special attention to her connection with the world of Yiddish literature, the fellow writers who sustained her during her remarkable career. You could call this talk the sriva of Blume Lempel. In Yiddish, the word sriva means environment or atmosphere, but can also connote fellowship and connection. It's a place where one belongs, a home. The sriva that Blume Lempel constructed for herself was highly idiosyncratic, part privacy and solitude, part support and community. As writers ourselves, we were fascinated by Blume's sriva and how richly rewarding it clearly was for her. Lempel's approach to building a literary home for herself was uniquely her own. Her work itself is unique, as we will discuss, but it was also part of a larger picture, the larger context of what it was to be a writer in Yiddish in the second half of the 20th century in the United States and as a woman. As the work of women writing in Yiddish is increasingly translated, studied, and analyzed, we are glad to help her work take its place among these found treasures. Let's begin with how we stumbled into this project, and then we'll get into Blume Lempel's life, her amazing stories, and her sriva.
So years ago, I began studying Yiddish as a memorial to my mother. My mother was Jewish, unlike my father, and had grown up around Yiddish and sprinkled Yiddish words into her speech. So connecting myself to Yiddish, to Mama Lushan, was a way for me to connect myself to my mother and to all those who had gone before, my forebears. My first teacher was Max Rosenfeld, himself a translator, living in Philadelphia. And early on in my Yiddish studies, I told Max that I wanted to try my hand at translation. And he went to his bookshelf and he pulled out this slim gray volume and opened it up. It was by Blume Lempel, and it was inscribed to him by her. And then I met Ahron in a Yiddish reading group.
I grew up in an Orthodox yeshiva family surrounded by Jewish languages, including Yiddish, and I formally studied Yiddish as an adult. I've been involved in Yiddish culture since the early 1990s as a reader, writer, translator, and activist. In fact, my connection as an adult to Yiddish was forged through YIVO. I took courses in the YIVO Sommer program and worked at the YIVO for many years in the Max Weinreich Center, the YIVO Archives, and the YIVO Library. And it's great to see so many friends who I've known for a quarter of a century here tonight. So in a way, YIVO made all of this translation work possible for me. This talk tonight is a kind of homecoming for me.
So the two of us opened this little gray volume and we began to read, and frankly, we were blown away by what we found. Truly unique, experimental writing, fearless, taboo-defying, and lyrical. There were surprises at every turn, on every page, practically in every paragraph. We had never seen any writer like her in any language. And at the time, we knew almost nothing about Blume Lempel. By the way, she pronounced her name Lempel in the old world, but when she moved to the new world, her children grew up as Lempels, so we've been using that whenever we can remember. So beyond the fact that she grew up in this small town, we believe she was born in 1907, unlike what our introducer said, in Koroskov, in what was then Galicia, subsequently Poland, and is now Ukraine, where it's pronounced Koroskiv. And she said she was born in a whitewashed room by the banks of a river that had no name. So we wondered, who was this woman who wrote with such feeling and so many exact details about such a wide range of characters, not only in the old world, but in cosmopolitan Paris between the wars, to New York, to California. So we went hunting, and we tracked down Blume Lempel's heirs and relatives and former colleagues and found boxes of her personal papers stored in an attic. We came here to YIVO, and we went to the Library of Congress. We read her letters. We combed through boxes of Yiddish publications looking for her name in the table of contents. And we learned that Blume's father, Abramsha Pfeffer, was a butcher. Her mother, Pesya, read novels, subscribed to a newspaper from the nearby city of Lvov, now Lviv, and was considered cultured by the townspeople. We learned that her older brother received a formal education, but that her own schooling was very sporadic. For a few years, she went to a religious school for girls. At times, a tutor came to the house. But as she later recalled in an interview with the Yiddish scholar Itzik Gottesman, my father believed that all a girl needed to know was how to cook a pot of food, sew a patch, and milk a cow. In Poland, she remembered, I didn't write at all. I only dreamed of writing. And as she dreamed, she began to store up observations that would later appear in her work. And all her life, her girlhood self remained accessible to her, as she put it, the girl who was, the girl whose tides ebb and flow on my sandy shores to this day. For a time, Bluma's childhood world seemed safe and secure. As the narrator in one story says, enclosed within my father's words and my mother's tears, the world came to me as a completed picture, and I accepted its preordained colors and nuances as part of the natural order. Just as the sun rose every morning behind our barn and set every evening behind the tree that my father pointed out with his finger, so I stayed within the picture frame, walking in the light, avoiding the shadows, never straying beyond the borders. The house where I was born and grew up was my personal fortress. When my father shut the gate every evening, I was certain that nothing bad would befall me. And those lines are from the story called Even the Heavens Tell Lies. So she didn't believe this secure world was secure forever. Viele der Himmel sagen liegen. So would you like to hear that in Yiddish? And for those who don't know Yiddish, remember the words of Franz Kafka, who said, ladies and gentlemen, don't be afraid of Yiddish. You'll understand more than you think you would.
Mein Tatens Wort und mein Mames Träer seien gewähnt die Moos, in welcher ich bin gewachsen. Mein Welt ist gewähnt a fertig Bild und ich hab reagiert zu die verbestimmte Kollieren und Nuancen auf einen natürlichen Eufen. Punkt wie die Sonne ist aufgegangen jeden Frühmorgen unter unser Stahl und in Abend sich gesetzt. Punkt bei jenem Baum, wo mein Vater hat früher angewiesen mit dem Finger, als so hab ich gekirrt meine Tritt in der Rahmen von Bild, gegangen in Licht und ausgemitten dem Schatten. Äußer der Rahmen von mein Lebensbild bin ich keinmal in Ehrgeiz nicht gegangen. Das Haus, wo ich bin geboren und gewachsen, ist gewesen meine einzige Festung. Wenn mein Vater fleckt den Ofen versparen dem Teuer, bin ich gewinn sicher, als mir kein Beis nicht geschehen. When Bluma was 12, that comforting sense of order began to crumble. Her mother died, and when her father remarried, Bluma was pressed into service as a housekeeper and nursemaid for the new couple and their young child. Her brother Yisrael, 8 years older, had become involved in militant communist activity. He was caught and imprisoned, then escaped and went into hiding. Lempel remembered the police arriving at the house in the middle of the night to search for him, ordering everyone out of bed and stabbing into the mattresses while cursing the filthy Jews. Yisrael fled to France, and in 1929, at age 22, Bluma left Choroskov. There she is in the middle. She's something. She was intending to become a pioneer in Palestine, but on the way, she stopped off in Paris to visit her brother, who'd settled in the Jewish immigrant neighborhood of Belleville. Captivated by the city of light, Bluma abandoned her pioneer plans. She found a job in a factory where she met her husband, Blume Lempel. They started a family, and her dream of becoming a writer began to take shape. She began writing poems and meeting other Yiddish writers. During the 10 years Bluma lived in Paris, she fell in love with the city. It became the setting for some of her most important work, including a novel set in the years before and during World War II, and many short stories.
Just before World War II, the family was extremely fortunate to be able to flee to New York. And here they are a few years after the war. And in America, Bluma began to reach out to the New York Yiddish literary scene, especially the newspaper Morgen Freiheit, and she began to publish a serialized novel and short stories. But then the news from Europe began to trickle in. She learned that back in her hometown, after she left, her father's wife and their young son had been seized and killed by the Nazis, that her father had then set fire to the family home and hanged himself, and that on the day before the liberation of France, her beloved brother had been arrested and shot, leaving a wife and 2 sons. As she later said, Bluma was catapulted into a deep despair. The past was a graveyard, the future without meaning. I sat paralyzed within a self-imposed prison, she wrote. The years went by, many desolate, fruitless years. She began to burn her work. But then came a turning point. She had 2 friends, Chaim Plotkin and Razel Glass-Fenster, who were Yiddish writers, and it could be that it's thanks to them that we can read this work today. They were the ones who suggested that she dedicate herself to writing about the terrible destruction that was consuming her. And that idea, she said, opened a psychological door. She wrote, I felt I must speak for those who could no longer speak, feel for those who could no longer feel, immerse myself in their unlived lives, their sorrows, their joys, their struggle, and their death. So she had really found her calling. And her subject, as she developed it, was not the annihilation itself, but the aftermath, not the annihilated themselves, and mostly not people who experienced the ghettos or camps, but, as she put it, the survivors, the broken people who attempt after the war to establish a new link to life and who through it all remain broken. She took upon herself the task of expressing the experience of people like herself, an experience of displacement, flight, adaptation, and a special burden of remembrance and retribution, grief and guilt. And in an approach that was uniquely hers, she often went at the subject not straight on, not head on, but through a variety of subtle literary strategies in which the great cataclysm of the 20th century is never far from the surface, but often hovering just out of sight. She often said that she didn't feel part of any literary school or trend in any language. And when Itzhak Gottesman, the interviewer, asked her which books or writers had helped to shape her, she couldn't cite a single one. She said, I feel I don't borrow from anyone.
Yet as she embarked on this new chapter in her writing career, her sriva came to her aid. She sought out Yiddish writers like Hinda Zaretsky, a poet who lived in New York. Here at the YIVO archives, we found tender letters like this one from Lempel to Zaretsky. Quote, I feel close to you. You and your poems move me to tears. Your poems awaken in me a dreamy nostalgia. You and I draw from the same source. Perhaps the most important factor in her career was that by 1970, she had won the support of Ahron who was renowned throughout the world of Yiddish letters as a poet, as a cultural hero who had rescued treasured Jewish texts in the Vilna Ghetto, and as the editor of the leading Yiddish literary journal, Die Goldene Kate, which was published in Tel Aviv. Here is Sutzgewer's right-hand man, Alexander Spiegelblatt, himself a poet and writer. And here's what Die Goldene Kate looked like. After receiving her first letter of acceptance from Die Goldene Kate, Lempel recalled, I still remember how surprised I was at the warm answer. I remember even that it was a cold, cloudy winter day. But for me, spring gardens burst into the most beautiful bloom. The energy that I had conserved in my youth came out from under my apron. Sutzgewer Lempel corresponded for 20 years. Here we see an early letter from him, complete with a rather charming drawing, signed, All the Best, with Love, Sutzgewer. While another editor might have tried to rein Lempel in, to smooth out her rough edges, or tame her bold choices, what was critically important about Sutzkever was that he never did. Instead, he deeply affirmed her individuality. You have your own words, your own observations, your own madness, which you scoop out from within yourself like shovelfuls of hot coals. Your talent is not an ordinary one, of that I am sure. Sutzkever allowed Lempel free rein to pursue her unique narrative strategies, and this, like the intervention of Chaim Plotkin and Rachel Glass-Fenster, was a key factor in the development of Lempel's singular contribution to Yiddish literature. As you'll see, her stories were jagged and disjointed. They didn't move smoothly from point A to point B. Instead, often within a single sentence, you'll find Lempel's imagination moving back and forth between dream and reality, present and past, old world and new. We think this jaggedness is a carefully considered literary choice, one that we haven't found in other Yiddish writers. It's a reflection, we believe, of the disruptions in Lempel's life and the lives of her characters, an ingenious way to convey the restless and unsettled existence she knew so well. Lempel wrote back to Sutzkever saying, "I write not for my readers, but for myself. I write for the Dybbuk that is seeking a transformation through me." And as many of you know, a Dybbuk is the soul of a dead person that takes up residence inside a living one. Sutzkever promptly wrote back, "For that Dybbuk you must write. You must write for yourself and for me and for that chosen reader whom every true talent brings into being through the magnetic power of the work itself." "Your prose is in essence poetic," he wrote, "and therefore must be pure and careful, like pure poetry. Every drop is as important as the rushing current. Sincerely and with much belief in you."
Another sustaining force was the poet Malka Heifetz-Tussmann. And here's a picture of Heifetz-Tussmann with her husband in her bathing suit. Why not? And here we have a letter from her in which she talks about the complex and very personal literary home that Lempel was building for herself. She writes, "Bluma, Bluma, why do you think your poems would shock me? Not so. Good poems, Bluma." And then she writes, "You dive into the self, and behold, a sriva. Here is Bluma." So what she's saying is that Bluma is her own sriva, that the Bluminess is the sriva, the environment, the home. And that's an important part of the truth, but as we're seeing, it's not the whole truth. Lempel's work became well known in the Yiddish world. It was published in a great variety of Yiddish journals, including not only Die Goldene Kate, but also Neue Zeitung and Yisrael Stimme in Tel Aviv, as well as the New York publications Sein, Zukunft, Unser Eigenwort, Jiddische Kultur, Vorwärts, Jiddische Kämpfer, and Allgemeiner Journal, and Rejbum, Los Angeles, Letzte Neues, Australia, Unser Weg, Paris, and Dorem Africa in Johannesburg, South Africa. She won several literary prizes, including the Ikuf Prize, the I.J. Siegel Prize awarded by the Jewish Public Library in Montreal, and the Chaim Zhistovsky Prize. And in 1979, she began preparing her first short story collection for publication. And for editorial help, she turned to this man, the Tel Aviv poet Binam Heller. And here is a letter from him. I hope you're appreciating the handwriting we had to decipher, in which he marvels at the quality of her work and the fact that her manuscript contains very few typos. He agrees to prepare the manuscript for publication by the Peretz Publishing House in Tel Aviv. And apparently this is the way a lot of Yiddish books were produced. You didn't go to a publishing house that had its own editorial staff. You hired your own editor who took care of all that, and then it went to the publisher and the printing press. Heller writes, "You are one of the best and most original storytellers in Yiddish." And he urges her to include even her most daring stories, ones that had been rejected by journals, including Oedipus in Brooklyn, which Sutzkever himself had turned down. And this is the book that became A Rege von Emmes, A Moment of Truth, the volume that Max Rosenfeld put in my hand 10 years later. And once the book was published, praise began to pour in. Praise that recognized that Bluma's was a unique voice, a talent distinct from others in the Yiddish literary world. The celebrated Yiddish writer Chaim Grade wrote to her how sad it was that her talent had flowered so late at a moment in history when there were very few Yiddish language readers. But he said perhaps this was inevitable because Lempel belonged to her time and no other. So here's his letter. Listen to this. It is enough to make one weep that you appeared in our literature at a time when so few good readers remained. But perhaps it could not have been otherwise. Perhaps your magical, sweet, lyrical tone could not have come into being any earlier than in our autumn years. You are a modern writer in the most beautiful sense.
Lempel also attracted the attention of the Montreal writer Chava Rosenfarb, who introduced herself to Lempel in this letter. This is even harder to read. I've been reading your work in Die Goldene Kate, she wrote. I feel very close to your way of writing, to your style. Who are you? The two women exchanged warm and frequent letters until 1990, critiquing each other's work, revealing their struggles with writing and publishing, sharing their views of other writers, and offering news about their families. In 1986, Rosenfarb wrote, I admire the beauty and austerity of your language. You are so economical, careful not to waste a single word. We agree. As translators, we found her prose so poetic and so rich that we had to work very hard to capture her unique melody, one that we found to be denser, more idiosyncratic, more, well, unhinged than that of other women or men writing in Yiddish. Yonya Fein, a Yiddish writer and artist who lived in New York, was another admirer. He wrote to her, throughout your stories, time undulates, not measured or divided into past, present, and future. As long as we are alive, we carry all times within ourselves simultaneously. And who knows for sure what is fact and what is dream? And who can say with certainty how much arrival there is in going away and how much going away in arriving? These and many other questions are woven in a natural way into your work. Oh, there we go. Rachel Korn wrote from Montreal. There she is, on the snowy hills. I sense in your poems the true poetic quiver and flutter. She goes on to offer line by line criticisms. Lempel vacationed in Florida with a whole world of Yiddish readers and writers, and here at the YIVO archives, we found a candid, intimate correspondence with the writer Usher Shushinsky, who had settled in Miami. She wrote to him while she was preparing her second collection, complaining that once it was published, what will I do with it? For whom am I writing? It's hard to summon the energy to write, but I don't want to infect you with my mood. He wrote back right away, as for what you will do with your new book, in the new era we are writing in, a book is a monument. The lexicon of New Yiddish literature contains 8,000 names. To be among these names is a great honor. Let go of your misgivings and be proud to belong to this select group, these creators of Yiddish literature, of Yiddish culture.
Her second collection came out in 1986, Ballade von a Cholom, Ballad of a Dream. And like her first book, it contains an extraordinary range of subject matter. We meet women and girls of all ages. A lonely little girl who's too poor to own a doll, so she draws one on a misty window pane with her finger. A mad woman dancing in the marketplace. A mother and son living in the forest with the squirrels, hiding from the Nazis. A woman lying on her back on a table in an abortion clinic. a woman who occupies herself with extravagant daydreams as she and her husband drive down to Florida for the winter. An anti-Nazi spy in Paris, disguised behind a mask of glamorous makeup. A deeply religious African-American woman living in Brooklyn who's obsessed with the fact that she's told a lie to save her son's life. And now a word about the title story, Oedipus in Brooklyn, a story that Avram Sutzkever decided was too shocking to publish. And maybe he was right. You can be the judge. We find that in Lempel's hands, the account of a contemporary woman involved in a transgressive sexual relationship with her son is not sensational, not tawdry, and not played for laughs. Step by step, she leads us into the heart of darkness. She tells about the car accident that kills the father and blinds the son, of the growing closeness of mother and son, and of their increasing isolation. And finally, the two of them leave the familiar streets of Brooklyn and move to Florida, which becomes a backdrop of horror for the tragedy that's beginning to unfold. And here's her description of Florida. A blinding haze hung in the air like carbon fumes. The earth was scorched. The waterways dried up. The white egrets disappeared. Creeping insects of all kinds eked out their slithery existence, leaving behind silver threads of slime on the desiccated waterbed. Sylvia and Danny hid from the sun. In the house, the air conditioner cooled their parched bodies. And by the end of the story, we've come to understand the plight of mother and son, and perhaps even to sympathize. So you can see from that paragraph that the natural world plays a powerful role in Lempel's work, and often beauty is intertwined with menace. Sometimes nature becomes a protagonist, and many of her characters seem to be most deeply themselves when they're working in their gardens or communing with animals in the zoo, or in more than one case, in more than one story, befriending a housefly.
Finally, why did Blume Lempel write in Yiddish and keep writing in Yiddish, even as the Yiddish readership grew smaller and smaller year by year? She wrote, "Yiddish is in my bones. When I hear my mother's oi in my head, I lift my eyes to the heavens and hear God answering me in Yiddish. The birds, real and imagined, speak Yiddish, and the wind at my window speaks Yiddish. Because I speak Yiddish, think in Yiddish." So Yiddish was a portable homeland, a way of remaining true to a world that was no more, while she made her way to new places, confronting new circumstances in new languages. Yiddish was also a way to honor the 6 million who perished in the Holocaust, including the members of her own family. She wrote, "My older brother tells me what to write in Yiddish, directing my stories from beyond the grave. This is how it was. This is what happened. So must it be recorded. You did not survive simply to eat blintzes with sour cream. You survived to bring back those who are annihilated. You must speak in their tongue, point with their fingers." And for Lempel, Yiddish was also a way to hide. Writing in Yiddish could feel isolating, but we think that maybe that very isolation freed Lempel to pursue her own idiosyncratic version. Even as she was being published in Yiddish periodicals, receiving literary prizes, and corresponding in Yiddish with readers and writers all over the world, living in her sriva, at the same time, her children couldn't read what she wrote, and her neighbors in Long Beach, New York, had no idea she was a world-published writer. As she told the aforementioned Itzik Gottesman, "I hide my literary existence under my apron. If you asked my neighbors about my writing, they think you were crazy." So perhaps writing in Yiddish in an English-speaking world helped to liberate Lempel to be the taboo-defying writer she was meant to be. When Blume Lempel died in 1999, well, we'll go back. Stay tuned for technical difficulties. There we go. Okay. When Bluma died in 1999 at her home in Long Beach on Long Island, an article in the Vorwärts stated, with the passing of Blume Lempel, Yiddish literature has lost one of its most remarkable writers. An empty spot has opened in the galaxy of talented women Yiddish writers.
So in closing, we want to read to you a luminous passage from one of Lempel's most extraordinary stories called Waiting for the Rag Man. And it's about her girlhood in that small town in Eastern Europe and about how her memories have traveled with her into adulthood. And this time we'll have the Yiddish first. Die junge Pesachsohn hat lieb gehabt, sich zu spielen mit die vielfarbige Gläser, was man hat ausgestellt auf ein Kommod, lekovid Pesach. Sie hat die Kolieren zu neu gegossen, sie chemisch verwandelt in schimmerierendicke Sterns. Die Sterns haben sich ausgesprayt und besprenkelt die frisch gekalkte Wand, die lehmende Podlige, dem weiß versprayten Tisch mit die Pesach-Keire in der Mitte. And now in English, the young Passover son liked to play with the colored glasses that stood on the sideboard in honor of the holiday. The sun poured the colors together and transmuted them into shimmering stars that spangled the whitewashed walls, the clay floor, and the table with its Seder plate set in the middle of the snowy cloth. As I lifted my hands in the air, the beams rained down over my head like golden raisin wine that began to ferment inside me. To this day, I capture handfuls of sunbeams and use them to illuminate the shadows.
During her lifetime, Lempel's dream of an English language readership, for the most part, eluded her. It's a joy for us now to bring her, to help her unrealized dream come true. As we bring Bluma's shimmering sunbeams and her abundant shadows to new readers like you, we hope we're helping this extraordinary writer to be known as she wanted to be known, as a bold explorer of new terrain, as a dazzling stylist, and as a profound teller of truths about the human condition. As new generations of readers encounter Lempel's work, whether in the original Yiddish or in translation, they will have the opportunity to step into her sriva. As they do, they will be richly rewarded. We hope you'll enjoy her work, savor it, learn from it, and share it with others. Thank you so much. A herzlichen Dank.
So we're glad to take questions or comments. Yes.
I was wondering, as translators, how do you penetrate someone's psyche to the point where you're able to recreate that atmosphere from which all of these feelings and emotions flow, so that you're able to convey to the reader what the writer intended in the original language?
There you go. That's what it's all about. Well, you can answer. What I would say for myself is that in some ways it's not so different from reading, in that you're in a conversation with the writer and you are bringing your own imagery as you read these words. You paint that picture. You summon those emotions that she's giving you the prompt for. We worked on this for many years, and we came to feel closer and closer to her as a person, but and as a writer. But I think it's always a collaboration, and translation is just taking that one step farther. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. The letters helped. I mean, I think seeing the letters, the photos take you into her sort of private world. But ultimately, it's the text, that stands. It's the words that stand. And they were challenging. They were. Her style is so unique. There's such a mixture of poetry and prose and tense and what tense are we using, and that you really, you're not always sure that you've gotten it right, but you kind of go with what you think. So that's what I would say about that. I think with translation, there's a distance, you're talking about someone else's work. And even though you spend a lot of time with her, it's not, sorry, I keep banging on this, leaning into this computer. Even though you're spending a lot of time the writer's work, you're still at a remove. She's not there. It's not like some translators just get to work with living writers. And so that's a more direct collaboration. Translating a writer who's not, available, there is some guessing, there is some hoping you've gotten it right. There's some distance. It was a different era. Like now there's like, everyone's like spilling on Facebook, and they didn't have that then. And we're fortunate to have the Itzik Gottesman interview, and there was also a tape that the poet Troim Katz-Handler made with a group of Yiddish students. So we have that. We have her voice, so we have her voice, we have her image. But it's a moment, it's just a moment in time, when someone put a camera in front of her face. Who knows what I would say if someone stuck a camera in front of my, well, they're doing it now, but, we didn't get a chance to see how things evolve. We have that snapshot in time. So, but we do have the letters, as I said, and so a portrait does emerge. You hope it's accurate. So that's enough.
Did her writing as Yiddish readers, did it remind you of any other Yiddish writers or anything you've come across? I know that you mentioned that her writing is unique and original, or that was your impression of it. But I mean, for like a writer like Chaim Grade, if you read, some of the descriptions, just like describing the sun rays that hitting against a synagogue, window sill, all of those are really strong in Grade. And a writer like Chava Rosenfarb, who felt that Lempel's writing, was like her own, or speaking to her. And so, did anything come to mind?
I think you do find some of this imagery of sun rays and walls and so on that comes up. But what I came up with was that she is like what would happen if you took the writer Grace Paley, who's this sort of wisecracking, humorous, very down-to-earth New York voice, and blended it with Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
There may be some passages that sound like Grade, but, we both read Grade. I would not, she is in a very different literary genre, not genre, but mode. And certainly not Chava Rosenfarb. I just don't see it. Like, I think, those I would place, at least Chava Rosenfarb, firmly in, the realistic novel tradition.
Chaim Grade was a modern, I could consider a modern Yiddish writer, writing, but he was a poet himself, so in his novels.
There are poetic passages in Grade, but there's nothing like, it's not even like anywhere near Blume Lempel. Like, it just isn't. Like, I've read a lot of Grade, but I just wouldn't, I realize that, it can be considered problematic to say someone is so unique, but she kind of was. So, I'm sure she read widely. She certainly demonstrates, a knowledge of Peretz and other classical writers, but
it was just difficult to for me, it was just what I was responding to was her claim that she wasn't really influenced by anybody. So that was, if she's
right.
She is indeed well read, or was well read. It seemed like maybe like a writer of Grade or somebody kind of having influence.
She mentioned Freud, she mentioned Spinoza, she mentioned Bergson, Henri Bergson, whose work I don't know. So, but one can read widely, and then is that an influence? I don't know. Like, that's something to think about, maybe. Yeah. This came up at another one of our talks. Is that surely she didn't come out of nowhere. Like, right? Surely she wasn't this total autodidact.
But I think what we tried to get across is that she was supported by a real world of incredibly supportive people. And boy, I wish I had the kind of thing that was coming her way, the strokes and so on. But what they were saying to her was, go for it. Go for your own, what your Dybbuk is telling you to write. And that's really special. Way in the back?
Yeah, I was reading the journal and diary of the Lower East Side Russian Jewish immigrant poet married to Horace Gregory. She won the Pulitzer in Poetry in 1940. What I became interested in was, after the war, this Russian domesticity on women. I mean, the pressure was that that's your place, that's what we have to have in America is women with domesticity on their minds. Also, her husband made some money, teaching at Columbia in different places. I guess Mr. Lempel made a good dollar because they're living in Long Beach. That matters. Also, there was salon life among the English. They nasty people, backbiting, jealousies. The impression I get is the Jews were a little bit more relaxed. The Yiddish thing, they felt they were a threatened group. Or was there backbiting, nastiness? Sitzka was a little bit tricky there.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. That domestic burden, she makes reference to that. She had 3 children, and they also adopted an orphan who was a cousin of her husband's who had been orphaned by the war, whose parents had been killed in the war. And he came over and moved into their house, and one of the most interesting stories involves that situation where all of a sudden this foreigner is in their house, and how does he adapt, and how does he affect the dynamics in the house. And then, what was her second point? Can you do something?
What was the second point? I don't remember.
So the domesticity, and the backbiting. Yeah, I think what we see in these letters, maybe she selected carefully who she was going to write to, and who she kept up with, were the people who really became intimate correspondents, who really helped her keep going. And we saw a nasty remark here and there about, oh, did you see the latest issue of such and such? Oh, I can't believe that got published, or something like that. But mostly I think she kept herself separate from that kind of thing. And the salon, which I think definitely was a salon, was a virtual salon. It took place by letters, not sitting in a cafe.
I mean, the other thing is that would you save a nasty letter? Like she didn't, you usually save the nicer letters. So, I mean, maybe there was. And also, would somebody write a nasty letter to like a Yiddish writer? Like, I'm just throwing these things out there. So, yeah.
Oh, calling her.
No, I wanted to ask another question. As a translator myself, I was wondering, did you work for hands, or did you read each other translations? How did you manage to
What was
go
your
to
process?
Our process.
Oh, am I doing the process talk? Okay. So we each read the collections and wrote synopses and made recommendations for inclusion or exclusion. And sometimes those were different ones. And Ellen's literary standards are very high. Very, very high. So, yeah, there was some hair tearing. Yeah, so, and then, we came to the selection of these pieces, and then we each, we split up who would do the first draft, and, one person did a first draft, and sent it to the other person, then we went back and forth until we had, like, a workable version, and there was a lot of red ink, like a lot of it, so it took a long time to get to these, yeah.
Go ahead.
her knowledge of French, do you think she had access, for instance, to to novels or books written by women in France? Because the thematic made me think maybe that she would have read the French.
I don't know. And I don't know whether she read book, I think she read in French somewhat in the 10 years she was in Paris, and then when she came to the U.S., I don't know to what extent she would read things in French. I don't know. You mentioned her. No, and you mentioned Simone de Beauvoir. Her relationship to the women's movement was kind of through the newspaper. She knew all about it, and she makes reference to it, and she did not consider herself part of it, although I would classify her as somebody who was definitely a woman-centered writer.
I wondered about her need to be anonymous in the place that she lived. And I wondered if you thought that that was simply a personal matter or it somehow was part of her literary life or necessary to her literary life.
Yeah, I think that being hidden or being separate, isolated somewhat from the world, was an important part of who she was as a writer. And I think that when you're writing Oedipus in Brooklyn, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about your neighbors and what they would think of that. And she wrote other things that were also very transgressive too, you know, the story of an abortion and so on. So I think that was really important, and it was also very important for her to be sustained by all her literary friends and that literary world and those prizes and the publications and so on. So it was really both things I think were very important. There's a real theme of hiding in her work. There are many stories in which people are hiding out in the forest, or they're in disguise. So I also think that she felt the way I think many people feel, that there is some secret self that you don't share with anyone else except in certain ways. And in her case, it was through her writing, which not everybody does, but that feeling of there's something that's really different about me. There's something that's true of me that I can't just share freely. Was, essential to her as a person and as a writer, both.
Yeah.
This is for you, Ellen. Did you find Bluma's debut inhabiting you during this translation?
Not really, but I would say maybe you did.
So Ellen thinks some of my poems have been influenced by being so immersed in Blume Lempel for almost 10 years. Well, 10 years. Maybe, yeah. I mean, there's some poems about hiding out in the forest and fleeing suburbia to live in the trees. Maybe, yeah. She's a powerful presence, yeah. She's a powerful presence. She definitely inhabits your head. And I think all those fan letters attest to that. They speak in kind of rapturous tones that kind of go beyond the usual fan letter. I mean, they're kind of almost, there's a kind of ecstasy in them. So, yeah. Do you know that? Did you? Oh, okay.
Cecile?
One of the things I remember being struck by when I read her work is the stories, as you mentioned briefly, that are about non-Jewish characters, like an African-American woman, and I hadn't encountered that previously in Yiddish literature. So just in terms of thinking of translation, I'm wondering if if it was different to, if you have like a black American character speaking Yiddish in the original story, but then you're translating it into English, right? Is there a difference between conveying, let's say, dialogue that would have been, in Yiddish in the original, and dialogue that presumably would have taken place in English, spoken by a black character, but was written in Yiddish, and you're now translating it into English? Like how
Yes.
do you deal with those kinds of layers?
Right. Once again, you're getting at some of the difficulties of this project. I think dialogue is the hardest thing in any translation project. To get, especially if there's something kind of contemporary or colloquial about what's being said, it's really hard to convey that sense of colloquialism and everydayness without getting into our particular idiom, which really does not work. chill and so on. You just don't want to go there, So, but I would say that was not the hardest part of this project. There isn't that much direct dialogue, for one thing. And she brings up these characters, and there is not a sense that, well, this is a completely different kind of thing. This kind of character is not our usual character. No, it's every character is treated with respect and compassion and a sense of empathy, and you sort of lose the sense that this is somebody outside of the usual Yiddish world, I think.
I mean, there is, the whole, themes of social justice, themes of the American context. African Americans do appear in Yiddish literature, particularly in the Prolet Pen anthology. There's a lot of Yiddish writing about race issues, race awareness, racism, and I think Yiddish writers were very interested in that theme. One reader thought this particular story was not her most successful. We didn't share that opinion, but I think it's kind of easy to say that, because she was venturing out, but she was not alone as a Yiddish writer in that interest. Her handling it might have been different from some of those other writers whose names escape me, but Yankel might know them. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
If there are no further questions, we'll adjourn. Feel free to have some food, and the book will be on sale, and we're happy to sign it outside. Thank you for coming.